Hey guys, I'm here with Darren, and we're gonna start a Periscope. This is Robert Schmidt. We're gonna talk about the human side of IoT, and I'm gonna hand the phone over to Darren for our first Periscope. Thank you, Darren.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You got it.
There we go. Okay, so I'll just
knock yourself out, sit up front there.
All right, I will. You're welcome.
You can talk right now if you want. It's just all commentary.
Okay. All right, so we're walking up to the front row here to listen to Mr. IoT, Robert Schmidt. Maybe we'll sit in the second row here. Or the third row, there we go. Okay, we're just waiting to start. Got about 5 minutes here. Hi everybody, this is Darren Knopfsinger with Deloitte in Atlanta. We're just waiting for Robert Schmidt to start. About 5 minutes here. How's it going?
Good.
Good.
You're recording?
We're periscoping here. Want to say hi?
Who we said hi to?
We have one follower right now.
Oh, okay.
We had three. A couple dropped off.
Well, let's hope they come back when we start.
That's right, that's right.
Thank you.
Robert, where do you think I should sit? Where will you mostly be? Right here or? Okay. Yeah, maybe just right here.
Okay.
This good sun again?
Best thing I've heard all day.
I'm here for you, brother.
So you made a video with my phone?
There's going to be a video running on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, early. I'm in Europe next week. I'll be on Sunday for Barcelona. Brussels, SAP Service Line is doing their set of trainings afternoon. Doing a set of trainings on Thursday.
I know, right? To figure out something else here.
You need to get some sort of a system where you can put that up.
Maybe a knee prop.
You doing the whole thing?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Maybe we'll have some other people join us. I was actually going to watch on Periscope. I'm like, I'm here in the hotel, so I came down. That's why I came in my jeans.
2020 already, and it's nearly done. Deloitte is never going to survive, and our partnerships are irrelevant. We will never be inventive, exploring, and discovering. We only wanted to stay where we have always been. There was never a need to stay hungry for new things. We've been forever stuck in what we already know. We never wished to be more than that. Because who needs competence, expertise, and a huge network to partner with when you have one great skill to completely rely on? Because we think it's scary to stumble around in the dark, so we haven't been afraid to stand still and never dared to start looking forward. We always attempted the easy solution, not interested in the better solution. We tried, and thus What we really did was following our own cold tracks instead of looking for untrodden snow. We're going to miss the boat, and we have no reason to believe the future of Deloitte is a bright one, unless we see that it's never too late to start looking forward.
And on a high note.
The future of Deloitte is a bright one, and we have no reason to believe we're going to miss the boat. Looking for untrodden snow instead of following our own cold tracks was what we really did. And thus, we tried the better solution, not interested in the easy solution. We always attempted to start looking forward and never dared to stand still. So we haven't been afraid to stumble around in the dark, because we think it's scary to completely rely on one great skill when you have confidence, expertise, and a huge network to partner with. Because who needs more than that? We never wished to be stuck in what we already know. We've been forever hungry for new things. There was never a need to stay where we have always been. We only wanted to stay inventive, exploring, and discovering. We will never be irrelevant, and our partnerships are going to survive. Deloitte is never done, and it's nearly 2020 already.
I had to watch this video about 2 times before I believed that it was truly just reading the same words backwards. The message is, look at things differently. And this is what I'm going to talk about today around IoT. Hello, my name is Robert Schmidt. Thank you for having me. I am the Chief IoT Technology Officer for Deloitte. I also go by Mr.IoT or just Robert. And it's actually really interesting for me to be with you guys, because when I originally came to the States 20 years ago, I started out with SAP. So to be back at SAP conference is really kind of fun. I'm enjoying it, so thanks for having me. What I'd like to talk about is think about things first. This is a bit of a play on think mobile first. If you remember when we started talking about mobile, there was this theme. Why don't you think of mobile first when you start developing websites? Today, often when you go online, you find that websites aren't thought of as the website first, but they think of the mobile application or the mobile aspect first. So I took this and I started to say, what would happen if we think of things first? I played this video because it really helps me to remind myself to think of things differently. When something looks hard, try to take a different approach. And so this is why I played that video first, beside the fact that I like videos to wake people up. This thing is kind of slow. One of the things that's so unique about IoT is its scale. The scale of IoT is something totally new, something we've never seen before. When you think of when you think of places and networks that connect places, we talk about a million different places. And yes, I know the numbers aren't quite perfect, but it kind of works nicely in progression that way. When you think of people, and in this case of devices, mobile phones and so forth, we talk about 1 billion devices. When you think of connected sensors and the Internet of Things, we're going to talk about 100 billion sensors. That number is so big. Everybody talks about big data. When I talk about IoT, I say that's huge data. We have not seen that scale before. I don't know if you've seen this, but when you walk through airports, you sometimes now see the advertisement says we are processing 5 billion interactions a day. I kind of smile at this. There's very few of those, but this is what we're going for, and this is what we have to work for in terms of setting up our infrastructure when we talk about the Internet of Things. So when I talk about IoT, one of the things I like to remind myself of is the scale we're talking here about, and it's just a whole new scale we haven't seen before. This is just another view of scale in terms of revenue growth. 7 trillion by 2020 in IoT revenue, 4 billion connected people, 50 trillion gigabytes of data. It's just it's mind-boggling. And really, what interests me is what use cases are we going to come up with. It's really interesting to think about this because what happens is they're very different by industry, but it's just a scale-wise, it's just really exciting to be in the space of IoT. The thing that I talk about here at the bottom is, the other thing that I find fascinating is how this is actually, the growth is not going to just come out of the US, but actually you can see how it's going to shift to APAC. There's going to be actually an even bigger percentage of market share coming out of there. So I want to talk a little bit about what does Deloitte do about IoT, and I want to show you a few slides around that. First, we really want to approach this from a value perspective. So many people talk about IoT, and you know, I'm a geek at heart. I like to think about technology, but IoT for technology's sake isn't going to be the thing. Really, what's the value of IoT? And we've come up with this framework. We call it the information value loop. And what you can do around this is you can really go around and you start with the sensor on the top right that creates whatever it does create, right? Sometimes it creates data, sometimes it creates unstructured data. But you know, even there is value. Now you're going to connect that to a network and you have value there. The interesting thing is when we talk about sensors and networks, we're coming out with, in a month I believe, with Tech Trends 2016, and the title of it will be from IoT from sensing to doing. The interesting thing about this is when I think of sensors and when I think of networks is many people think it's a greenfield approach. I have to create a sensor, I have to put a new sensor into something, and I'd argue there's a lot of brownfields out there. What I mean by brownfields is there's areas where there is sensors that are actually already there. When you think of all the sensors that exist in manufacturing equipment that's just not connected, I call that a brownfield. So what happens now? What's the value of just connecting the sensor? You might have the sensor already, but you might not have the network. Now you can see why you can generate value out of just by networking some of those sensors. So these are examples I want to give you along the value loop, how you can add value along every single one of those steps. Standards. I don't know, you can think of standards what you want. Some people love standards. I'm a European, so there's some structure that we come with, and we love our standards. But that doesn't always work. But there's definitely something around normalizing your data, really kind of bringing different data sources together. That might not necessarily be standards, but you can see value in that too. And what happens with that is, you can actually, that data on its own can generate value. Because what happens is it actually allows certain businesses, they have the data, now they make it available. Is there value in that? What can you do as an enterprise with generating data, and actually, can you sell it? Can you advertise it? What can you do with that? Now we aggregate it and we add some intelligence to that. Pretty obvious where the value is. It's an interesting example. I worked for a long time for a game manufacturer, and a game publisher actually, we make games too. And we collected terabytes of data each day. The question always was, what do we do with that? What's the data we can actually do something with? And the interesting aspect that's really becoming much, much more prevalent and really accessible to everybody is both machine learning as well as artificial intelligence, where you can actually take the data and actually a machine tells you what to look at and what's interesting and so forth. So there's a lot of use cases around predictive maintenance that you have where you actually, when you have sensors and machinery. Now, I was yesterday with a steel service company, and they have a ton of pumps running in their factories. Sorry, not pumps. Electric motors running in their factory. And so what happens is if you'd have a sensor on those motors and you'd actually know the motor is acting up, current is going up, whatever it is, now they don't have downtime. They today have a rack as big as the wall back there with really expensive electric motors sitting in inventory. That costs money. Why do they do that? Because they don't have predictive maintenance. So this is a really interesting value generation of an augmented intelligence. And then obviously here comes the augmented behavior. What do I do with that and how do I act in that? So I talked about Deloitte and I talked about our approach to this. Our approach is very much value-based. Our approach is very much industry-based. We really believe that many of the use cases are very industry-specific. And so that's when our industry expertise comes into play and is really helpful. once you've figured out what the value is, I always say, think big, start small, scale fast. Now comes the technology into play. What do you do with technology? And what we've done here is, my colleague Andy Decker has a funny comment. He always says, there is no one ERP for IoT. There is no one system that does all of IoT. You really need an ecosystem of partners and vendors today to stitch them and have them work together in order to create a full IoT system. So what we've done is we've taken, you can see at the top again, the 5 phases of our information value loop, and then we've broken this down into the different components you want to consider when you build your own IoT infrastructure and system. I want to highlight a few things on there. This is different from, so you see big data up there. Some of the analytics stuff is very familiar to you, particularly if you work with HANA and other big data products. What's different about this and what's different and new about IoT is, I want to highlight 2 things. Stream processing. So it's just not enough anymore to just stick data in, do a process on it, and then have analytics happen, and then act on it. Some of the stuff needs to be decided right when it happens. And so stream processing is something that's new and that's really driven by a lot of IoT use cases. Another aspect, device management. It's really interesting to me. I was a CIO before, and the one skill set, the one talent I didn't have that I will need for this is really knowing how sensors work, how they connect, and really deal with that aspect. So today, when I go and meet with clients, the first question is, what can I measure and how do I connect that? Do I connect that to cellular? Do I connect that to Wi-Fi? What's the connectivity like? And then how do I manage those devices? It's an area that we've had before in machine to machine. It's not particularly new from that point of view, but it's new to a CIO. It's new to many organizations who want to get into IoT. And quite frankly, it was new to us in Deloitte, so we've been hiring people in this area to really be able to help in that area. What happens too is now you got to imagine these 100 billion devices. You got to manage them. Yeah, I can go out there and buy a Raspberry Pi, and I can stick some resistors and some stuff in there, and I can make it work, and it's probably going to work actually. But now imagine 1,000 of those. Imagine updating them. Imagine the security around this. There is a whole aspect around device management that's new. We've seen a small version of this with mobile phones, but we haven't seen a scale of this that's similar to this. What happens now, I want to take this one step further, and this is I want to talk about edge processing. With chips getting so much cheaper, and what happens is now these sensors, they sit there, and not only do they actually sense, but they actually process data. And so lots of the logic gets pushed out now to those sensors out there. So imagine you have these devices, you manage them. Not only do you have to manage connectivity and what data protocol they have, but now you're going to update the firmware up there. You're going to want to push stuff up there, that all the logic and so forth. So edge processing and edge computing is really an interesting new aspect, again, driven by IoT. And then obviously at the bottom, standards and security, and I noticed there's a Z in there that I don't know why it belongs to. It doesn't belong to the right in any case. I always say there's 2 things. There's security and privacy, right? There's security in terms of the communication, but now there's also security in terms of like what do you run on these devices? Because now if you have logic up there and you develop this, you have your IP out there. It might be in public places. How do you protect it? There's whole new problems around that. And then there's privacy. What data do you store? How do you store it? And the interesting thing about privacy is, I believe privacy is very personal. Security is personal too, but privacy is something that's even more personal, and it changes generationally. So I'm a bit of an oddball. I always say, for me personally, I don't really mind if you know where I'm at, because if I don't want you to know where I'm at, I really should probably not be there. But that's not how most people in my generation feel like. When I talk to my kids, they have a whole different set of privacy thoughts and considerations. It's a different paradigm for them, and it's really interesting to watch. So when you now deploy these systems, you got to figure this out. What do you do with them? How do you work with them? How does that work? So we have a whole group around that deals with that. I just wanted to briefly touch on that. So I started saying, think big, start small, scale fast. I believe IoT is one of those scenarios where it's so important to, you want to think big, but you don't want to think a long time. You want to actually try this out. Because you might find that the value and the business case you had in mind doesn't work with your customers, doesn't work with your employees. You actually might find out that when you connect, when you suddenly enable this, that you have other use cases you hadn't even thought of. I always like this example. We worked with a small company, a startup that put sensors data edge processing, and they put this into a galvanizing plant. And the whole business case was based on, when in a galvanizing plant, it's a very, very blue-collar environment. And there's fires pretty much every day, not a fire like it goes up in flames, but a fire when they put something in, they test it out. So it's really hard for them to figure out how to do fire prevention. So they would burn down one plant a year, a couple $1 million of cost. So they decided if we're going to put smart sensors in there to deal better with fires, we're going to have a business case, and they did. So they started instrumenting these really, really old school galvanizing plants. And they got the business case. But what they also found out is they said, well, we might as well not put a sensor on the crane. And so now suddenly they were measuring actually the specific weight of, when they put the equipment, they picked it up and then they put it in, and when it floats, specific weight changes, right? So therefore, suddenly they actually knew something about the process that they didn't know before. What happened is, because of this, they could change and lower their raw material needs. Now imagine of that use case, of that business case, of that value. And they would have never found that value if they haven't started with the fire. I was sitting there thinking, a fire prevention device? Why don't you just go to Home Depot and buy the fire prevention device? No. What they found by doing the small one is they found a much bigger one, which is why I talk about our agile approach. You got to try this out quickly. You got to really start small, try it out, go through iterations. And you know, there is an aspect, some of them will fail, and that's okay. And so this is it's a very startup-like approach to go about this think big, start small, scale fast. But you know, this is how we go about this. Oops, wrong one. Am I there already? I guess. So this is the slide I personally get passionate about. And this is how I started out. This is the title, The Human Side of IoT. I talked a lot about enterprise. You can see numbers up there. I have them on my cheat sheet that are really exciting. And I find the enterprise use cases are kind of really tangible. I get it, right? I can see why a sensor helps me in a machine to get preventive maintenance data, why it helps me to run more efficient, right? 45% efficiency gains by 2030. I can see the bottom line results. It's very kind of tangible. I can see it, I can do it. It gets really interesting when I can move over and start talking about consumers. Well, we're going to have 25 billion connected devices by 2020. We're going to have a ton of new apps around that. And we're going to have 2 devices, 2+ by 2020. Actually, I want to know, interested, who here has some wearable on them? Just one? Okay. A few. Who has 2? I typically have 2 today, and my watch is dead, so I didn't bring it. Okay, more interesting. It's interesting to see how we believe that this is going to move out forward. What's going to happen with the consumer is it's actually going to make a shift in business model for many people, which is interesting. It's going to enable us to do things that we hadn't been able to do before. We now know something about people that we didn't know before. Often there's this interesting dilemma. People say they do one thing when they actually do something else. We found this out when we started instrumenting retail shops. You know, they say that's their pattern, but when we actually watch them, they do something different. And so there's going to be really interesting business model changes that we can do around this. Here's what gets me passionate. Imagine 1 million lives saved by self-driving cars a year. Think about food production increase, because now we know that tractor drove there and therefore we were able to make a more efficient agriculture system. Think about water. It's kind of funny to talk about water while in Vegas. It works best in Vegas, actually. It works second best in California to talk about water. The Indian government is investing in putting sensors into the Ganges River and affecting millions of people by cleaning up the Ganges River. We worked with people of one of the states up in the east, a very high pollution state. They were talking about measuring pollution in the air. This is where I believe we're going to make an impact with IoT. That goes way beyond enterprise and consumer. And so what I'd like to close with is the question of what impact will you make? How can you leverage in your companies, at your company, in your personal life, IoT to make a human impact? Thank you. Any questions? I let you out early. I'm actually curious, how many people from Deloitte are here? I saw a lot of people from Deloitte. Oh, about a third. Half. Thank you for coming. Any questions? Comments? Everybody ready for drinks?
You're standing between us and the happy hour, so.
I can tell. Well, thank you so much.